What's going on, everybody? It's Lester from Cannabis Wiki. Welcome to We Talks, where we talk to people inside the cannabis community and the industry to find out who they are and what they're up to now. Always at the top of our show, we always like to thank the community for doing their part and helping flat the curve. And the curve is pretty flat. As we see, communities and municipalities are starting to open up shops and businesses. Things are slowly starting to get back to the normal. So definitely, everybody pat yourselves on the back. I'm definitely giving you guys an applause doing what you do. I'm doing my part. Cannabis Wiki's doing their part. And just keep up doing your part. And soon we'll all be hugging and hanging out together more and more. So that brings us to our guest today. Our guest today is president of the British Columbia Independent Cannabis Association. She is a writer, a filmmaker, an activist who has helped medical dispensaries gain municipal support under prohibitionist federal government. A partner of Groundworks Consulting, co-founder of Canada's first Women's Grow Chapter, co-author of Lift & Co.'s Retail Cannabis Training Course since 2012. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jamie Shaw. What's happening, lady?
Thank you so much. I just one quick correction. I'm not the president of the BC Independent Cannabis Association. I'm just a director. Cortland is the president. Cortland Sandover Sly.
Okay. Thank you for the straightening out. But even in Through the Wind, people that say that you should be. So how's things with you? Where are you located right now?
I am in Vancouver, Canada. Place I chose to relocate to a long time ago, mostly because of the cannabis culture.
Okay. So how's things been with you and family and friends through COVID and quarantine?
Pretty good. I'm a little antisocial anyway. I do a lot of work from home wherever I can. So things actually haven't been too difficult on me. I think one of the hardest is I was estranged from my family for about 20 years, and they're all based in Ontario. And we just sort of connected last year. And then, of course, everything kind of stopped. So I haven't been able to go see them or anything. So that's been a little weird. But honestly, I've been pretty blessed.
Good. So friends, family, everybody's doing good. Everybody's healthy.
Yeah, seem to be.
Yeah, that's good. Same here. So what I like to do here on We Talks, we like to get to know you guys a little bit. Everybody that's inside of the the community, or whether it's somebody in the industry, and somebody like yourself, being as busy as you are and doing all the work that you do, I like to kick it way back to high school. So what was it like with you in high school? Were you a teacher's pet? Were you kicking down boys in the schoolyard?
Yeah, I mean, my high school was weird. Everything about my life is a little weird. So my high school, I went to a Catholic junior high school for the first year. And then the second year I was in the public school where I was taking a lot of theater classes. I was actually able to end up taking about half theater classes. And then I moved to Alberta. And so I ended up going to a performing arts high school. Most of my high school career is actually theater. I directed a show when I was 16 that toured all around Ontario. So that took up most of that school year. I managed to get through school without actually doing very much school at all, which benefited me to a great degree.
What was that, through theater? Theater allowed that?
Yeah. I mean, so the first year that really sort of happened, I had missed it in grade 9 because I was going to this Catholic junior high school that had just started and didn't have one. And I had actually been fairly big into sports, tennis and the 100 and 200 meters.
Okay.
And I hurt my knee that year. And so I ended up being able to take 2 drama classes. And then the next year, a special performing arts program had spun up for the first semester. And then I left before the second semester, so I didn't have to do all the other courses. So theater helped a lot. I managed to get my high school diploma because they've got these weird rules where if you go for school in one province and then you go to another province and then you go to another province, if you have enough credits when they do all the conversion from the differences in the way they do it, they consider you graduated whether you actually hit the prerequisites or not. So I think that the final total was something like 70 credits. And 50 of them were actually theater related.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you've got a love for theater.
I do. Yeah, I do. I mean, it's been a little while, but I bookended that career really nicely. The first one that I directed was a play about suicide, and so we were touring around schools in Ontario and putting on the play with peer counselors, and then we would also counsel people because sometimes it was a pretty rough play if anybody had been dealing with any suicide issues or knew anybody that had been. So that kind of started it. And then the last time I did anything, I was actually an assistant director, which I didn't do very often. Right. But I was able to be involved with a show called Single Black Female in Los Angeles that was directed by Coleman Domingo. And that was... After that, I was kind of like, you know what? I don't think I can top this. I think I'm good for theater, and I'm done on that. So I'd done a bunch of film and stuff in between as well, and a little bit after. But yeah, pretty happy with the way my theater career both started and ended.
Well, that's pretty crazy because I've interviewed quite a few people, and you're the second one that's come across my plate that's been a business owner in their teens. So I think it was 19 years old you started your first business?
Yes, yeah, and that was a theater company. I think I was 23 when I started my second one, which was an entertainment trade journal that ran in Toronto for a couple of years. It was kind of like backstage. Right. And yeah. And then, of course, directing, you're sort of in this weird role if you're directing or artistic producer at all. You're in this sort of weird role where you're sort of the boss of the company, but also not really, because it's a lot more collaborative than most things. And so I've always loved that, a collaborative approach a lot more. So
right. So at 16, what made you come up with suicide as the topic for your play?
Well, that was a little weird too. So that was in that this special performing arts program that had started. It was the first year, and there were two scripts kind of given to us, and one was the teacher's pet was going to direct that one, and I didn't actually like that teacher very much at all. So I put myself up to direct the other one because I knew that it wouldn't really get any attention from her. Right. So we were able to kind of just go and work on the play by ourselves without a lot of interference. And then when the opportunity came up for the tour, both plays were staged and ours was better. So we got to then go on tour for that. So it wasn't really purposefully done other than to just try and go off and do stuff I liked.
Right. So now, did the play have an impact through students, through the community? Because that's a huge topic that you chose.
Yeah, and we got to tour around a lot of Ontario. I mean, we ended up going all the way. It was based in Cornwall, but we ended up going all the way out to Elliott Lake to perform it. What? And like I said, it was kind of hand in hand with a group called peer counselors. And at one point, we had hit every school in our three counties except for two. One was a French high school that didn't want us in because we weren't doing the play in French. And the other one, the principal just didn't want us in because he didn't want us talking about suicide. We were doing a show in Prescott in the morning, and then we were driving to Kingston to do one in the afternoon. And the people at Prescott got the news that somebody in our three counties had committed suicide, and it was at the one school that we hadn't gone to. Wow. And the counselors from Prescott, drove all the way out to Kingston to come and meet us and give us the news and to help us because we had been going around and helping people. So, right. I mean, we like to think that we had an impact for sure. I mean, there was usually 4 or 5 suicides a year in our three counties, and that year there was only the one. So, I mean, hopefully that started conversations and helped. But, there's no way to ever really know.
Right. Well, that's huge. The insight you had from so early, I guess that kind of set the groundwork to where you ended up here now, because you're quite the fighter. You've been doing quite a lot of work, and you've taken quite the top challenges in the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I moved around a lot when I was little. I don't think it wasn't until recently that I'd actually even lived in the same city for more than 4 years. And even that was kind of an aberration. So I moved around a lot. I was going to a lot of different communities, a lot of different schools. And I was somebody that never liked people picking on people. I'd go to a school and I'd see the same sort of behaviors. There was always people that were sort of singled out for whatever reasons. Right. And that, I've always liked the underdog. I've always been one for standing up for people that other people aren't standing up for. I don't know where that came from, but it was very early.
That's incredible. I'm liking where this is going. So For the high schools that you've traveled to, how was cannabis? Did cannabis play any part in your life at that time?
Yes, it did. When I started in theater, I started smoking, started drinking.
Hmm.
I actually had smoked the first time when I was 13. But by the time I was 16, it was fairly easy to find. Even in small rural Ontario, was never too much of a problem to find cannabis. So yeah, it definitely did. I mean, I became a daily smoker probably around 17 or 18. And that hasn't really stopped except for when I've been in places like Japan and didn't really have a lot of choice.
So how was your parents' idea of the smoking or cannabis, I should say?
I don't think they knew. I mean, I moved out fairly early, so I don't think they really knew that I was smoking a lot of cannabis. Yeah, it wasn't really something that came up for me, and I've been very lucky because I know other people that have had to worry about whether they smelt like cannabis when they went into an audition or something, and that's just not something I ever cared about. It was like, if you don't like me because I smell like cannabis, you're really not going to like me when you get to know me. So it's something that I've never let bother me, but
Right.
I've been pretty privileged and lucky. There was, when we lived in Toronto, there was one place that we always used to go and buy cannabis, and of course it was our Indigenous friend that would be the only one that would ever have any run-ins with cops at all.
Mhm.
There were a couple of times when we had to go and bail him out, and none of the rest of us ever had those issues, right? So, yeah, it's been a privilege for sure to be a white girl that people just give passes to for things. I mean, I've had my share of police harassment at times for sure, but in terms of the cannabis issue, I've been pretty lucky.
Mhm. So
I was actually in Dekine when I first moved to Vancouver. I was in a Dekine coffee shop that got busted, and I had this is the craziest thing. My grandmother had sent me money to go back home for Christmas, and I had just made a big cannabis purchase, and so I had cashed the money order, and I had the cannabis, and I had gone into Dekine for the first time. I had only been in the city for like a week or two,
Okay.
and I didn't really know what this place was. It looked cool. And I went in and I started rolling a joint, and the police came in and raided the place, and the officer found me sitting in this place with a big pile of money and a big pile of cannabis. And I had to tell him my grandmother sent me the money so I could go see her for Christmas. And he was okay with it. I mean, I found out later they'd been surveilling the place for a while, and so they knew I wasn't involved at all. And
Okay.
so, I mean, they took my cannabis, but they let me keep the money and they didn't arrest me. So I put that in the win column for sure.
So nothing ever came of that. That was a
Oh.
clean escape.
Yeah, no, very lucky there.
So let's talk about your second job that you created.
Yeah, so I'd been living in New York for a few years, and I found it really strange because there were constantly like audition notices and things that would go up for shows that were going to be touring Canada, that were basically Canadian shows, but they would do their casting in New York, and you had to be a Canadian citizen to get the job, which was just this weird
Wow.
thing. So you had to go to New York to audition for the job to come back to Canada to do the job.
Wow.
And when I came back to Toronto, I realized that the industry had been set up very differently in Canada, whereas in New York, the agencies certainly had power, but there wasn't so much stuff going on that you could go out and you could get work, and you could you could build a career slowly at first, but you could do it on your own. In Toronto, it was very different. The breakdowns for casting would, outside of CBC, breakdowns for casting would go to one or two agencies, and they would be the only ones that got it. And nobody else would even know the casting was happening. CBC, of course, didn't even put out notices because they would just do everything in-house. And so we started a trade journal called Call Time. It was similar to the Backstage and what you see in New York. It was New York Casting, I think, was the other one, where it was basically information for actors and job opportunities for actors and how to get a good headshot and what to put in your resume, how to build your resume, things like that. And it started working pretty well for a little while. I mean, we had a lot of blowback, because that's not really the way the industry was supposed to run there, and they didn't want it to run that way.
Right.
At one point, Backstage was looking at buying us out. And I think Backstage ended up getting the same sort of message that we were getting, that the industry was never going to go for this here. And so unfortunately, it ended up just becoming impossible to keep going.
And that was what, 2012, 2013?
Oh, God, no. That would have been, oh, shit, I'm going to age myself here big time. That would have been like 95.
Jeez. Okay.
95.
Okay. So I this name came up. Neil Allard.
Yes. Yeah. So at that time, I was president of the Canadian Association of Medical Cannabis Dispensaries, and I had been kind of tracking. I was the only one really tracking dispensary opening and closures at a time when most people kind of thought most of them were going to be closing. I also am a bit of a history buff, which actually does come from theater. When you direct something, you really kind of have to do research on a lot of stuff, and I found I really liked doing that kind of research. So I would kind of lay out the history of dispensaries in different areas and contrast and compare. That work led to both the documents that ended up swinging the city of Vancouver towards licensing dispensaries and being able to testify in the Allard trial, which was nothing to do with dispensaries at all, had to do with the patient's right to grow their own medicine. John Conroy was able to use this to kind of go, look, the government has been failing in this area over and over again. They're not providing patients, and it's forcing people to come up with other solutions, which were compassion clubs and dispensaries. And so the final ruling of that, Justice Philan actually gave my testimony quite a bit of weight. Again, especially considering it actually didn't have anything to do with dispensaries directly. Mm-hmm. So that was fun. I got to help contribute to patients being able to grow in Canada.
So that's from a legal standpoint. So you are highly respected for that point of view.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say that.
Why not? Why not?
Technically, that's why people sometimes they're like, oh, the dispensary expert. And that is why I was an expert witness in a court trial, and so that's the only place that really comes from. But yeah, it was, like I said, the case was really about the patient's access to cannabis in terms of personal growing. So I mean, that was a win. There's still definitely issues with the licensing and things like that, but this was at a time when the government was trying to get rid of it completely, so we wouldn't even be dealing with these little headaches now if it wasn't for the Allard trial.
Right. So let's talk about exactly what it is that you do.
I don't know exactly what it is that I
do. There's a lot. We won't get into the writing. Let's get into the dispensaries.
Okay. So I started... I served a term on the board of directors of the BC Compassion Club Society, and then kind of earlier, and then when Stephen Harper got reelected to his last term, he came out pretty strongly against dispensaries, and so I went to work for the Compassion Club. I started off as a bud tender. A few months later, I was doing all of their communications, and then a few months after that, I was involved with CAMCD, where we were doing the same thing. So it was communications, it was government relations and lobbying, a lot of that type of work, and then of course just educating, and that's I've managed to kind of keep doing those things no matter what else has been going on. I've been able to kind of keep those plates spinning. So right. A little bit of advocacy, a little bit of government relations, and a little bit of education. So that's mostly what I do.
How did you get pointed into the government end of it?
How did I what? Sorry?
How did you get pointed into the government end of it?
I don't think it wasn't so much a matter of getting pointed. So I was at the BC Compassion Club Society, and we had a federal government that was trying to shut down all dispensaries and had a lot of people convinced that they were going to succeed at it. Having studied the history of dispensaries in different California cities and seeing different city approaches, it became pretty obvious to me that even though we don't have the same sort of powers that states do, where you can get a people's initiative to kind of push through legislation, and our city governments. And it gets weird when you start talking about provincial governments, because in some ways they have a lot more autonomy than American ones do. And in a lot of other ways, they really have a lot less. And the same is true with the cities. And so
give me an example. Give me an example.
Well, cities can kind of institute and collect more taxes down there, for example. They have a little bit more power to kind of set up certain commissions and things like that, that cities here are usually fairly tight on. Right. Vancouver has a slightly different charter than most other cities, which also kind of helped. It made a bit of an easier path. But yeah, it has to do with the breakdown of powers, and you don't typically see Canadian cities kind of going their own way on things. It's very rare, and it's usually been around drug use, like things like Insight and stuff like that. Vancouver, of course, has been a big proponent of safe drug supply for a very long time, particularly the social policy committees and groups there. The drug policy coordinator, for example, also is usually very understanding and knowledgeable about issues around this. So it just became obvious that the federal government wasn't going to do anything. The provincial government didn't really have to do anything. They didn't really agree with the government, but they weren't really going to take a contrary stance to it. And so that left us with the city, and the city ultimately is the one that is the ones with the boots on the ground. They're the ones that are actually dealing with it. So it was a lot easier to educate them on it and to motivate them to do something about it as well. So it was that work in California where I was able to kind of show, if you look at cities like San Francisco and Oakland and Berkeley, they moved very quickly on this issue, and they had systems that were working fairly well for their cities. And then you look at cities like Santa Barbara, San Diego, where they were staunchly against it and was just constantly having to do more enforcement. And then cities like LA, where they finally realized they had to do something, and they had waited so long that it started backfiring, and they started getting lawsuits, and that really kind of scared the city of Vancouver into wanting to do something. Right. And then that combined, of course, with a bunch of other organizations and groups like the city of Vancouver that were also not very happy with the prime minister and the way he was doing things. And so we were able to kind of create this coalition almost of a bunch of people that normally probably wouldn't have done much about it, seeing a way that they could at least make Harper look like an idiot on drug policy, if nothing else.
Right. So where do things stand right now today with the medical dispensaries and the municipalities?
We're in many ways we're way back from before all of that work started to really make any progress. Here in Vancouver, we've got an all new council. None of the people that voted for the dispensary licensing are still here, which has been problematic. Even in Victoria, where they do still have the same mayor and some of the same councillors, they don't. I'm not sure whether it's they don't understand or they know very well that they can just push it off now. Because now when a medical dispensary goes to the city and says, look, we're trying to take care of these patients, the city will just go, well, yeah, but you can just go apply for a recreational license. And that doesn't work for these models. As soon as you do that, most of their patients are no longer going to be able to access. And so you've got the Vancouver dispensary, you've got VCBC and the BCCS, all still unlicensed, all still serving patients that the rec stores are not able to care for the same way. So it's been depressing, and I think depressing really kind of sums it up the most. It's difficult because now they think there's a path, so it's enough for them to kind of wash their hands of it without realizing that they actually aren't dealing with the same issues that they were when they were initially looking at medical dispensaries. Like in the city of Vancouver, for example, they simply just transferred over those regs and said, okay, well, now these regs are for rec dispensaries, when the regs were written very specifically for medical dispensaries. I mean, that was the excuse they used for the distancing rule. Kerry Jang was very clear, was that he didn't want the dispensaries clustered in certain areas because he didn't want people to having to travel to those areas. So that was how they were able to kind of get people to agree that, yes, it should be spread out through the city so that there's access in different neighborhoods. That, of course, was then used as an enforcement tool to try and shut down dispensaries, and still in place now, even though it's actually recreational dispensaries and not medical at all.
That is crazy. That's crazy the way things are going. So I guess every province faces this anytime there's a new government. Things can possibly change with the rules and regulations and that are in play.
That's absolutely true. I mean, I'm a big believer that the only reason BC has a model similar to Ontario's is because we've got the NDP, and the NDP has always been, big publicly union supporters. And we saw a lot of pressure from the alcohol store employees, unions saying, look, if you're going to legalize cannabis, we're all out of work. Meanwhile, we've got these big chilled warehouses. You could use those to store cannabis, even though that's not the way you want to store cannabis at all. Mm-hmm. And so we ended up with this sort of mixed model where private retail is allowed, but there's also still public retail as well. I think if the BC Liberals had gotten in, they were fairly quiet on the dispensary file, but they were also pretty supportive. Like when Vancouver and Victoria and other cities came out to license dispensaries, the province let the provincial health officer go out and say, yeah, we support them on that. Right. And so we know that we had been in a lot of conversations with them. We knew that they'd been in power for 12 years, so they were a lot more informed on the issue than the government that we ended up getting. And so, it's almost like a new clean slate all the time, with all the old progress just wiped away.
That's crazy. So I guess we should emphasize the power of the vote. Should something be implemented, whether it's a medicinal dispensary or a recreational dispensary, should it really be reminded to cannabis users that our vote is hugely important for who we're putting into power?
It is, but this is where you start running into issues like this is why we're seeing the protests that we're seeing right now around Black Lives Matter now in my life, when we grew up watching this happening in the 60s and 70s and nothing's been fixed. Mm-hmm. It's because who do you vote for? If you look at the United States right now, Biden, okay, he's better than Trump, but is he going to fix it? Right. And that's kind of where we are with cannabis, where it's like, I don't really see a party taking a lead on this. The NDP could have and does have some interesting, points to make around it, but it's not very clear right now. Who would you vote for that's going to actually make that change?
Right. So it's kind of up in the air. We're all left up in the air.
Partially that's how the system is designed, right? And so, I think being engaged is important. I think engaging whoever your local MP is very important. I think it's important to educate them and to keep them on topic at times. But I also think that there's a lot of other issues that they deal with, and there's this perception that a lot of people still aren't for cannabis. And so they're trying to make everybody happy, and that makes things very difficult. So, on the one hand, I think, voting is important. On the other, I think there's a lot more that needs to be done to really see some meaningful change from that.
It kind of sucks that we have to leave it into the hands of municipality and politicians to see what the outcome is going to be for even recreational users, let alone medical users. So, yeah, absolutely. In your mind, what do you see for the cannabis industry, recreational and medicinal?
Oh, well, that's a big question.
You got that right. You got big shoulders. You can answer this.
Fair. There's so many different facets and aspects to it. I think, honestly, I'm maybe being optimistic, but I think within 5 to 10 years, we may have a recreational system that makes a little bit more sense. I'm hoping. With the medical system, I don't know. We've got a review coming up on this October 2021, where we can start bringing up these issues again, but we're not seeing the real drive to change, and adult legalization has really taken a lot of the steam out of our arguments, frankly, because now it's easier for people to go, well, you can just buy it. forget the fact that they're paying taxes on it, forget the fact that it's actually a medicine, the fact that the prices are a lot higher than they are used to, or can still get down the street. So, I mean, I think there are a ton of issues that we need to sort out, and I think it's going to take a long time. And in terms of medical, that's a tough one because they still don't treat it like a medicine. There's a reason they don't treat it like a medicine, which is so that they can tax it. And we're seeing them take full advantage of that. Yeah. We're not seeing that money going into more research. They've opened the gates to research, but they've been so slow on approving it that it's not really getting done. Most of the research is coming from academics that are kind of new to the topic rather than coming from the people that have all of the experience in it. So, we've been hearing for a long, long time, well, anecdotal knowledge is just anecdotal knowledge. And it doesn't matter if it's 2,000 years old or 12,000 years old, it's still just anecdotal, which I get, as we're moving towards, more science-based approach, I get that. The problem is that it's not that anecdotal knowledge that's leading that research. So we're starting all over. We're looking at each little component on its own. I think we've got some fairly comprehensive studies of about 6 cannabinoids now, when there's still maybe 120. We don't even really know exactly how many cannabinoids are in it. Right. And then, if it's taken us that long just to get to 6 from 1970s till now, it's going to take us a really long time to get to that 120. And it's going to take us even longer before we actually start seeing how it works together and what different percentages do. And we haven't even started talking about terpenes or flavonoids yet. So I think science is a very long way from getting close to what folk or anecdotal knowledge has already kind of figured out. Right. And I think... it's depressing sometimes. So sorry, it'd be such a downer on this, but it's.
I want this subject on the table.
Yeah, we're basically taking like an encyclopedia of anecdotal knowledge and throwing it out and starting with a grade school textbook of science knowledge. And so we're trying to replace a ton of knowledge that hasn't necessarily been verified in double-blind trials and things like that, right, with knowledge that's been verified on an academic level only, with no actual real world application to it yet.
So in your mind, for the country of Canada, which province is doing the best?
Saskatchewan, mostly because they didn't try and pretend to be a broker. They are, letting retailers go and buy the product from the producers that they choose to buy from. So retailers have a lot more control. There would be a possibility of trying to get a retail license combined with a processing license, for example, so that you could actually package it in store, which would then give retailers a little bit more control the way that they used to. They'd at least be able to see the products before selling it, which right now they really don't have that opportunity. So I think, Saskatchewan has to be, I think the best. Again, this is all a matter of perspective. If your goal as a province was to make money off of this, then Saskatchewan's not doing as great maybe as Ontario is. Because they're not running the website platform and they're not running their own stores and they're, but ultimately, I don't know whether they're losing money the same way that Ontario is. Right. So it'll take a little while for those numbers to kind of come in and make sense. And then, of course, it's not going to be super impressive to a lot of people because it's a small market. And so, hands down, Saskatchewan is doing the best, in my opinion.
Good to know. We'll have to keep an eye on those people out there and see what's going on. What can be incorporated over here in Ontario? Ontario sucks.
Yeah. Oh, that's the song, right? Ontario sucks. I'm too old a reference for you guys, but go look it up. 3 Dead Trolls in a Baggie. Ontario sucks. It's a good song. I can say that because I'm originally from there, so I'm allowed to say it.
Okay. No problem. Oh.
It's tough because, once a government gets control of something, it's not going to want to give it up very easily. They only just recently started giving up their monopoly on alcohol, and even then have done so very reluctantly. So it's hard, especially when they're making money off of taxes like for example, the excise tax. I'm hoping they start making enough money that they can finally agree to at least carve out medical patients from that so that they're not forced to pay that as well. But that's a very difficult thing to do, is to ask the government to stop giving up money.
Yeah, for sure. So here's a question for you. What is your most successful failure?
Successful failure. That's a tough one.
I try to be.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
I have to ask this because you're a go-getter. You're in a lot of fields. You do a lot of things. I haven't even touched on the comedy yet, and we haven't even touched on the writing yet, right? So I figured this is a good question for you.
It is. It's a difficult one. I mean, I've been pretty lucky. I haven't had a ton of failures. So the most successful failure, I think, it's probably got to be. I think it's probably got to be that trade journal, because I mean, I don't know. It was received well, so in that way, it was a success. I mean, it was received well by the people that it was meant for,
right.
But it was also a failure because the industry didn't want to change. So it's difficult to even define whether it was a success in any level or a failure in any level. Yeah, this is a tough one.
Well, I asked because
I have had have been spectacular failures. So there's like no success in there anywhere, right? So I did a 24-hour film festival out here once, and that was a spectacular failure. But we succeeded in getting one finished.
So it's usually our failures that give us our biggest lessons, and usually the most successful people that keep striving, they do encounter failures, and it's the failures that make them keep going even more. So I guess what I was looking for is what inspires you when it seems to be that the direction when we're heading in, and when you hit roadblocks and you hit failures, what is it that fires you up, that keeps you in the game, that keeps you going?
I think this ties back to the thing we were talking about being an underdog. I mean, when I hit that wall, I don't stop. And I think that's why, because it's like I've certainly faced a lot of setbacks, and I've had failures in different areas of my life for sure. But I kind of, if it's work related or something like that I'm interested in, I don't see that as a failure. I see that as a challenge. And so I will keep going until I get over that wall. So I think that might be one of the reasons why I'm having such a hard time with that question, because yeah, I don't usually have mixed success like that. Either it's a failure and it's a failure, or it eventually ended up as a success, even though there were a lot of failures before it.
Right. So let's talk about the comedy. Tell us about that. How did that come about?
Oh, this is another long, weird story. So, I mean, I had been doing creative stuff pretty much my whole life. And I was married to an American citizen. And at one point, I wasn't allowed back in the United States. And it was a time when I was actually taking care of my husband and his mother, who couldn't really walk very well. And we had rescued a dog off the streets of LA. And, my car was down there. We had actually flown up and had a rental car from Seattle, which then I had to get somebody to bring back across the border. It was just a whole nightmare. And at that point, we were kind of like, all right, we got to come up to Canada and do your immigration up here. And I was being told that I had to go and get a regular job, which was not something I'd ever really done for more than a couple of months. I had to go and get a regular job with a regular paycheck to prove that I was able to support his immigration, which was weird to me because I had made a pretty decent living most of my life just doing contract work. So that was already a bit of a weird thing that I had to take on. So I had been writing a script about a driving instructor, and I knew nothing about it. And so I was reading the Georgia Straight, and there was an ad to get your driving instructor's license, and I needed a job, and I had this idea for the movie. So I was like, all right, I'm going to become a driving instructor. And so I did. After about a year, I just started getting really bored because it wasn't enough. Like, I wasn't doing enough. I was teaching in the car and in the class, right. And I had a lot of classes. I think I was teaching 6 or 7 classes of about 20 kids a week. and then in-car lessons as well. And I was bored. So I tried to figure out something that I could do on my own. I like writing, but it's never been my main thing. Directing was always my favorite thing. And so that required people and resources that I didn't have. And so I just decided I'd write a stand-up routine. And there was this female comics night at this place down on the drive. I can't even remember what it was called. So I just showed up and I did the set and people liked it. And I was asked to come back the next week. So I came back the next week and then they said, okay, we need you to do twice as long next week. And
so hold on a sec. Hold on. Just so simple. You went to the comedy house, just got up on stage and did your thing.
Yeah. And then by the second week they were paying me, and then they doubled that when they asked me to double my set time. Okay. And then, like a lot of other industries, they, paying your dues isn't enough. They want to institutionalize paying your dues. And with stand-up comedy, that usually means signing on to a tour to go around to a bunch of like Holiday Inns in small towns. Right. And so I got offered that, and I was like, I can't do that. I can't give up my job to take another contract job, right, because I'm still trying to support my husband's immigration. So then I just kind of stopped doing it, and I miss it. I want to go back and do it again sometime. I keep thinking about it, but yeah.
So wait, you got some, is there some skits out there on YouTube, the comedy?
No, I mean, I used to do a lot of improv when I was younger, but right, that stuff didn't usually get recorded or put on YouTube anywhere. So that's probably a good thing. I don't know. Yeah. I'm trying to figure out, every once in a while, I'm kind of like, oh, I wish that play had been filmed, or I wish that had, but it's a good trade-off for the other things that could have been filmed and released. Let's put it that way.
All right. So let's talk about the writing a little bit. Let's specifically more so the retail for Lift & Co.
Oh,
how did that come about?
That was a little weird because they hired about 6 or 7 of us to kind of each do a component of the course. This isn't going to be a very entertaining story. They hired 6 or 7 of us to do different components of the course, and since then I think they've revamped it a few times, at least once with people from MAD. So I'm pretty sure that course doesn't resemble at all what it looked like when we actually wrote it.
So when they came to you, what did they say?
Basically, yeah, just that. But like they're doing different. I don't even really exactly remember what my piece was on. I think it was something to do with dispensaries or compassionate access, probably. But yeah, each person sort of did a different segment. Adam Greenblatt was one of the writers. Jenna Valeriani was one of the writers. MJ Malloy, I think, wrote one of the sections. Could be wrong on that one. And then they just put it all together. I don't. Maybe Jenna saw it. I don't think the rest of us got to see it at that point. And then, like I said, it's been rewritten a couple of times since. So it was kind of a boring story.
I don't find it boring at all. I thought it was pretty cool. No, I did. Because first I thought it was kind of weird when they came out with it, dispensary course. I was like, well, what the hell? You know, us old smokers, original smokers are just like, we're all like, what the fuck is this shit anyways? But I thought it was kind of different. The fact that they put guidelines in it, and then when they came to somebody with as much experience with dispensaries to you, it kind of made sense.
Yeah, but then, like I said, it's been rewritten a couple of times since. I think because they realized that wasn't the angle they were going for. It wasn't necessarily the audience that they were trying to reach. I was able to help create and teach the course out here for Kwantlen University as well, which was that one was a lot more fun for me because I didn't just pay lip service to that approach, and it made it a bit of an awkward course because it was like we would teach them a bunch of stuff the first day and then kind of go, now you can't really talk about most of that because you're not allowed to, and then explain to them why they were allowed to say certain things and not allowed to say certain things. And, we'd sometimes get asked, why did you teach us that then? And it was very nice that the school supported us in the fact that it's like, because it was important, and that's the way that people are actually going to understand it. And it's, even if you're not allowed to communicate the effects, at the very least you can do in order to be a responsible retailer is at least understand what other people have already learned from doing this. And so that one was a lot more interesting to me.
So if there's one thing you would like to leave the audience with, what would that be?
Oh, God. I don't know.
What do you mean you don't?
A nice bud. Roll joints for everybody. I mean, I think it's the game field changes all the time, and so I think it's a matter of really not giving up the fight for what we know is right just because we have something that is better than other countries. I think that's very important that we keep fighting for what's not right and what's not being fixed. It's been nice to see people kind of come out and start acknowledging things that some of us have been saying for a very long time. Right. If your idea of legalization is really gentrification, then it's probably not actually going to solve most of the issues that we've been complaining about and talking about for so long. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to really kind of keep that going and focus where it's needed, because a lot of times I'll see issues kind of come up and it's a bit of a red herring where either all the anger is focused on somebody who actually doesn't have the ability to fix it, or it's being used to distract from something else. So I think we need to stay very vigilant and focused on the important values that the cannabis community really kind of. There's always been outliers, but at the basic heart of it, it's hard to be. I've never understood when we see some people in the cannabis community come out and they're very filled with hate towards different groups. And I don't understand that. To me, as like, how are you smoking cannabis and still have hate in your heart for anybody that isn't actually a hateful person, right? And I think that we see a lot of that, and I keep believing somehow that we can prevail over that, but I also think it's going to be a long time, and I think it's going to be a lot of fight and a lot of difficult changes that are going to need to be made.
Do you think that the cannabis in Canada, do you think that has a longevity?
Cannabis in Canada, meaning different organizations that have used that name, or just cannabis in general?
Cannabis in general. Do you what is your opinion? Give us your last view of how you think the cannabis industry is going to fare in Canada.
Well, I mean, again, this is difficult because it depends on your definition of cannabis industry. I think some of the big LPs, obviously, they're going to survive somehow, even if all the people that are there end up being gone. Somebody else will take it over. They will survive in some manner, the same way that we have Budweiser and Coors. They'll be around. I don't think this gets a little hard to predict in terms of numbers of market, because if you're in every market, obviously your numbers are going to be a little bit higher than somebody that's only in one market. But I think the focus of the industry really is going to be on the micro cultivators as they come along. We'll be able to see people actually start to differentiate themselves, particularly as we start getting some of the regulatory burdens removed. And I think that's really where the focus is going to be, or where the good stuff is going to be. That between that and home growing, I'm hoping to see, I was lucky enough to be involved with Four Plants Cup. And I want to see a lot more of that kind of thing. I absolutely do want to see the local farmers fairs have sections for cannabis and different cannabis products. I very much want to be able to go to a grow and walk through it the way you can in a winery, where you can go through, or hazelnuts in Kelowna. You can go to like hazelnut orchards and see all the different hazelnut products that they make and how they make them. And it's like, I want to see that for cannabis. I want to be able to go to a cannabis farm and see the cannabis being grown and see how they treat it after, and see how they turn it into fibers, see how they turn it into a topical. That to me would be really cool, but I think we're very far away from that at this point.
I like it. Well said. So tell everybody where they can find you. Social media, YouTube, plug them out.
Jamie S.A. Shaw is my handle for most things, I believe. I'm not really on YouTube, but pretty active on Twitter. Actually, I'm pretty much only active on Twitter right now, but you can find me on Instagram and Facebook as well. Okay,
excellent. Jamie, I thank you very much for taking the time and talking with us. It's been fantastic. I learned a lot, and it was very interesting.
Yeah, go check out Shelter Market, too.
I definitely will. All right, guys, that is our special guest today, Miss Jamie Shaw. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you.
Bye.